Whispers in the woods. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. The 5 children, Clara, Liam, Sophie, Ethan, and Mia, huddled close together, their laughter from earlier adventures now replaced by uneasy silence. They had ventured too far from the campsite, chasing the illusion of adventure and freedom, and now found themselves in the heart of a forest that seemed to breathe and pulse with malevolent life. Clara, the oldest at 12, tried to stay brave for the others. "We should stick together and find a way back," she said, her voice betraying a slight tremor. Liam, always the skeptic, shrugged. "Maybe if we follow the stream, we'll find the way back." They agreed and set off, the trickle of the stream their only guide in the encroaching darkness. The forest seemed to close in around them, each step heavy with the feeling of being watched. Twisted trees loomed over them, their gnarled branches like skeletal hands reaching out to snatch the unwary. As they walked, an unsettling hush fell upon the forest. The usual sounds of wildlife were conspicuously absent, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow their voices. Sophie, clutching her doll, whimpered, "I don't like this place. It feels wrong." Ethan, trying to lighten the mood, said, "It's just a forest. There's nothing here that can hurt us." Mia, the youngest, looked up at Ethan with wide, frightened eyes. "But what if there is?" They continued, their pace quickening as the light faded, and a thick fog began to rise from the forest floor. The fog swirled around their legs, cold and clammy, making it harder to see the path. The trees appeared to shift and move in the mist, their shapes twisting into grotesque forms. A sudden scream shattered the silence, and the children froze in terror. It was Sophie. Her doll had fallen into the stream, and she had reached in to retrieve it, but now she stood staring, mouth agape, at the water. "Something touched me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Clara rushed over and pulled Sophie away from the water. "It's just the current," she said, though she didn't believe her own words. The stream, once a clear trickling brook, now seemed dark and foreboding, the water swirling in unnatural patterns. As they pressed on, the fog grew thicker, reducing their world to a small, dimly lit circle. Shadows danced at the edge of their vision, and strange whispers seemed to echo through the trees, too faint to understand but too persistent to ignore. The path led them to a clearing dominated by an ancient oak tree. Its massive trunk was twisted and scarred, and its branches reached out like the fingers of some great malevolent being. At its base was a dark opening, a hollow that seemed to beckon them with silent menace. Liam, ever curious, approached the tree. "Maybe we can take shelter here for the night," he suggested, peering into the darkness. Clara shook her head. "I don't think we should. It doesn't feel safe." But it was too late. Liam had already stepped into the hollow, his form swallowed by the shadows. The others watched in horror as he disappeared from sight, his silhouette merging with the darkness. "Liam!" Clara shouted, her voice echoing through the silent clearing. There was no response. Panic set in. The children ran to the hollow, but it was as if Liam had vanished into thin air. Ethan grabbed a stick and thrust it into the opening, but it met no resistance. disappearing into an impossible void. "We need to leave," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "Now!" But as they turned to flee, the forest seemed to close in around them. The path they had taken was gone, replaced by a wall of twisted trees and thorny underbrush. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling their ears with a cacophony of incoherent voices. Desperate and terrified, they stumbled through the forest, the darkness pressing in on all sides. Mia tripped and fell, crying out in pain. Ethan and Sophie helped her up, but the ground beneath them seemed to shift and buckle, pulling them deeper into the forest's malevolent embrace. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, replaced by a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The children froze, their eyes wide with terror. The ground beneath them trembled, and from the shadows emerged a figure, tall and twisted, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was a creature of nightmares, its body a grotesque amalgamation of twisted roots and gnarled wood, its face a mask of hollow eyes and a gaping mouth. It moved with an eerie grace, each step silent and deliberate. The children backed away, but the creature advanced, its hollow eyes fixed on them. With a wave of its twisted hand, the ground beneath them cracked open, revealing a yawning chasm of darkness. The children screamed as they were pulled into the void, their cries swallowed by the forest. As the chasm closed and the forest fell silent once more, the creature faded into the shadows, leaving no trace of the children's presence. The ancient oak tree stood silent and watchful, its hollow, still and empty. A silent sentinel in a forest that had claimed yet another group of unwary souls. And in the quiet darkness, the whispers began anew, a sinister lullaby that promised to lead any who dared enter the forest to the same terrible fate. In the light of day, the forest appeared serene and inviting, its dark secrets hidden beneath a veneer of natural beauty. But those who knew the stories, who had heard the whispers, stayed far away, for they knew that once the sun set and the shadows grew long, the forest would awaken, hungry for new victims to add to its collection. Shadows of the Playground. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the abandoned playground at the edge of town. The place had a sinister reputation. Children whispered about ghosts that haunted the area, luring the unsuspecting into a world from which they never returned. Despite these chilling tales, a group of friends, Emily, Jack, Sarah, Tommy, and Lucy, decided to prove their bravery by spending the night there. "Are we really doing this?" Lucy asked, clutching her flashlight as if it were a lifeline. "Come on, it's just a playground. There's no such thing as ghosts," Jack said, trying to sound confident. Emily, the de facto leader, nodded. "We stay here until midnight, then we can say we faced our fears." The playground, with its rusty swings and dilapidated merry-go-round, was bathed in an eerie twilight. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the wind carried whispers that seemed to echo through the empty spaces. The children gathered in the center, huddling together for warmth and comfort. Hours passed, and the atmosphere grew heavy with tension. Every creak of the equipment, every rustle of leaves set their nerves on edge. As midnight approached, the temperature plummeted, and a thick fog began to roll in, enveloping the playground in an ethereal shroud. Tommy, the youngest, tugged at Emily's sleeve. "I don't like this. I want to go home." Emily, suppressing her own fear, squeezed his hand. "Just a little longer, Tommy. We're almost there." Suddenly, a chilling wail pierced the silence, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The children froze, their eyes wide with terror. From the fog emerged faint figures, translucent and ethereal, their faces twisted in agony. Sarah screamed, her voice echoing through the night. "Ghosts! They're real!" The figures floated closer, their hollow eyes fixed on the children. The air grew colder, and the children could feel an unnatural chill seep into their bones. Desperate, they ran, but the fog seemed to close in around them, disorienting and confusing their path. "Quick, to the swings!" Jack shouted, his voice cracking with fear. They sprinted to the swing set, but the ghosts were relentless, their wails growing louder, more desperate. Emily tried to think, her mind racing. She remembered a story her grandmother had told her about how spirits were trapped in places where they had suffered great pain. "We need to find where they're coming from," she said, her voice trembling. "Maybe we can free them." "But how?" Lucy asked, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," Emily admitted, "but we have to try." The children ran towards the old school building adjacent to the playground, its windows shattered and its walls crumbling. The ghosts followed, their forms flickering like shadows in the mist. The entrance loomed ahead, a gaping maw of darkness that seemed to beckon them in. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and the walls were covered in graffiti and peeling paint. The ghosts circled them, their wails a cacophony of sorrow and rage. Emily led the group to the basement, where she hoped to find the source of the hauntings. They descended the stairs, their flashlights casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The basement was cold and damp, the air heavy with the scent of mold. In the corner, they found a trap door, its wood rotting and splintered. "Help me open this," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. Together they pried the trapdoor open, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel that seemed to stretch into the abyss. "We have to go down," Emily said, her resolve wavering. "No way," Tommy whimpered. "It's too scary." "We have no choice," Jack said, trying to be brave. "It's the only way." They climbed down into the tunnel, the air growing colder with each step. The walls were lined with old bricks, covered in a thin layer of slime. As they ventured deeper, the wails of the ghosts grew louder, more frantic. The tunnel led to a large chamber, its ceiling low and its floor covered in debris. In the center of the room was a stone altar, covered in dust and cobwebs. On it lay an old leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. Emily approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. She opened the book and found it filled with strange symbols and incantations. "This must be it," she said, "the source of the hauntings." "How do we stop it?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Emily flipped through the pages, looking for something, anything, that might help. She found a page with a drawing of the playground, surrounded by ghostly figures. Below it was an incantation, written in an ancient, unreadable script. "We have to read this," she said, pointing to the incantation. "Maybe it will free them." "But we can't read it," Jack said, panic rising in his voice. Emily took a deep breath. "We'll have to try. Everyone, hold hands and repeat after me." They stood in a circle, their hands clasped tightly together, and began to recite the incantation. The words felt strange on their tongues, like a language from a forgotten time. As they spoke, the air grew colder, and the ghosts began to swirl around them, their forms shifting and writhing. The ground beneath them trembled, and the room was filled with a blinding light. The ghosts let out a final, anguished wail, then vanished into the ether. The fog lifted, and the temperature began to rise. The children stood in stunned silence, their breath coming in ragged gasps. "We did it," Emily said, her voice weak with relief. "We freed them." The tunnel began to collapse, the walls crumbling and the ceiling caving in. The children ran, scrambling up the stairs and out of the school, just as it came crashing down behind them. They emerged into the night, the playground bathed in moonlight and silence. They stood in the middle of the playground, their faces pale and their bodies trembling. The ghosts were gone, and the playground was just a playground once more, its eerie aura dispelled. The children hugged each other, relief washing over them in waves. As they made their way home, the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the town. They knew they would never forget that night and the ghosts that had haunted their dreams. They had faced their fears and emerged victorious, but they also knew that some places, some memories, would always be haunted. Years later, the playground was torn down and a new park built in its place. The stories of the ghosts faded into legend, but those who had been there that night never forgot the shadows that had chased them, nor the ancient incantation that had freed the restless spirits. And in the quiet moments of twilight, when the wind whispered through the trees, they sometimes thought they could still hear the faint echoes of ghostly wails, a reminder of the night they faced the darkness and won.